Picture this. You wake up tomorrow and your life savings are worthless. Not reduced, not diminished, completely worthless. Sounds impossible, right? But here's the thing. This exact scenario has happened 5 times in the last 500 years. And every single time, people said the same thing you're thinking right now. It can't happen to us. 500 years ago, somebody made a choice that would echo through centuries and topple empires. It wasn't a war declaration or a peace treaty. No groundbreaking invention or scientific breakthrough. It was something far simpler and infinitely more destructive. Someone looked at gold and silver and said, what if we just used paper instead? What if people accepted promises instead of actual treasure? And you know what happened next? Every empire that took that gamble learned the same devastating truth. Those promises, they shattered. That paper, it burned. That trust, it died. Every single time. Now here's where it gets unsettling. This isn't ancient history gathering dust in forgotten books. This pattern has replayed itself with terrifying consistency across 5 centuries. And each time, the people in charge swore on everything they held sacred that their version would work, that their system was bulletproof, that their currency was untouchable. They were wrong. All of them. And right now, at this very moment, we're watching the same disaster unfold in slow motion. The setup. Think of the dollar as the center of a massive spiderweb stretching across the entire planet. Every international deal, every transaction between nations, every country's emergency reserves, they're all tangled up in that web. The whole system depends on the dollar staying strong. But here's the fatal flaw nobody wants to talk about. When your strength comes from promises instead of something real, it can evaporate in an instant. And when that happens, the fall isn't slow and manageable. It's fast, brutal, and absolute. 5 empires discovered this the hard way. The only question we need to answer isn't if we'll be number 6, it's whether we'll have the sense to see the warning signs before it's too late. The hidden truth. Want to know what they don't teach in school? Currency collapse isn't some random catastrophe that strikes out of nowhere. It's a deliberate choice. Every empire that crumbled made that same choice, bought into identical lies, and marched down the exact same road to ruin. They all started the same way, with real money backed by something tangible. They all ended the same way, with worthless paper backed by broken promises. And the journey from point A to point B, it always follows the same stages, the same timeline, the same predictable ending. Spain's golden curse. Spain kicked off this pattern back in the 1500s. They controlled more precious metals than anyone had ever seen. Treasure ships sailed across the Atlantic in never-ending fleets. The Spanish royals figured wealth meant metal, and they had mountains of it. But here's the cruel irony that brought them down. Too much money can destroy you just as surely as too little. When Spanish silver poured into Europe like a flood, something bizarre happened. Prices went absolutely crazy. Things that used to cost 1 coin suddenly needed dozens. The richest empire on earth became the place where regular people starved because they couldn't afford bread. Spain learned a harsh lesson. Real wealth isn't about how much money you've got. It's about what that money's actually worth. But their mistake was just the opening act. The pattern was set. And every empire after them would walk the same path with slightly different twists, but identical endings. The Dutch illusion. The Dutch Republic came next, building their power on trade and banking instead of treasure chests. They pioneered the first real stock exchange, the first central bank, the first system of paper IOUs backed by potential future earnings. For about 100 years, it was pure genius. Amsterdam turned into the financial center of the world. Dutch traders dominated international commerce. Their currency was accepted and trusted from Europe to Asia. Then reality caught up with the promises. Too much paper floating around, not enough real value underneath it. The bubble popped, fortunes disappeared overnight, and the Dutch learned what Spain already knew. Paper wealth is a mirage that can vanish faster than morning fog. Britain's gold standard gamble. British Empire stepped up next, convinced they'd cracked the code. Instead of relying purely on treasure or promises, they tied their currency to gold. The gold standard meant every pound could be exchanged for a specific amount of actual precious metal. It seemed unbreakable, foolproof, permanent. For 200 years, it actually worked. Britain built the biggest empire in human history, dominated world trade, and made their currency the backbone of global business. But even gold standards have an Achilles heel. They put limits on how much money governments can create. And governments always want to print more than they have gold to support. When World War I exploded, Britain faced an impossible choice. Stick with the gold standard and lose the war, or ditch the gold standard and print whatever money they needed to win. They picked victory over honesty, inflation over integrity. The gold standard died, and with it, the last real connection between money and something you could actually hold in your hand. France's revolutionary disaster. France tried getting creative during their revolution. They invented a currency backed by land instead of metal. These assignats were supposedly redeemable for church property the revolutionary government had seized. It sounded innovative, patriotic, and brilliant. It was actually a complete catastrophe. The government printed assignats to fund the revolution, then printed more for the wars that followed. Pretty soon there were so many floating around that they became totally worthless. Farmers refused to sell food for paper money. Cities erupted in riots over bread. The currency collapse helped spark the terror, and the revolution ate itself alive. France discovered that backing money with promises about assets you might own someday is just a fancy way of backing money with absolutely nothing. The Confederacy's final lesson. The Confederacy gives us maybe the most dramatic currency collapse in modern times. Desperate to fund their war, they printed money like there was no tomorrow. Confederate dollars flooded the South while actual goods became scarce. By the war's end, you needed hundreds of Confederate dollars to buy what once cost one coin. Soldiers got paid in currency so useless they couldn't afford to eat. Families pushed wheelbarrows stuffed with money just to buy one loaf of bread. When the Confederacy collapsed, their currency didn't just lose value, it became literally worthless in an instant. Millions of people watched their entire life savings transform into colorful paper good for nothing but starting fires. The terrifying pattern. Here's what should keep you up at night. Every single one of these empires believed they were special. Each generation thought their system was smarter, stronger, more advanced than what came before. The Spanish thought treasure made them invincible. The Dutch thought trade and banking made them untouchable. The British thought gold made them permanent. The French thought revolutionary passion made them unbeatable. The Confederates thought sheer determination made them unstoppable. They were all dead wrong, and they were all wrong in exactly the same way. Each empire started with money that represented something real: gold, silver, land, goods, value you could touch and measure. Each one ended with money that meant nothing more than a government's pinky promise to pay up. And every government, when crisis hit, chose to break that promise rather than face the music. The pattern is so reliable, it's basically a formula. Stage 1, real money backed by real value. Stage 2, slow replacement of real backing with paper promises. Stage 3, a crisis that tempts leaders to print more money than they can actually back. Stage 4, loss of faith as people realize the promises are hollow. Stage 5, total collapse as the currency becomes worthless and the empire falls apart. We've watched this exact pattern play out across 5 centuries, 5 continents, and 5 completely different systems. The technology changes, the names change, the faces change, but the underlying forces stay identical. And right now, today, the United States dollar is following that exact same trajectory. The dollar's journey begins. The dollar started its life exactly like every empire before it. Back in 1792, the Coinage Act set up the American currency system with precise backing. Each dollar was defined as a specific weight of silver or gold. You could walk into any bank and swap your paper for metal at a fixed rate. The promise was simple, clear, and seemingly rock solid. For over a century, it held up. But promises get inconvenient when governments need money they don't actually have. The Civil War forced the first major crack. Lincoln's administration issued greenbacks, paper money backed by nothing except the government's word. It was supposed to be temporary, a wartime emergency measure that would vanish once the crisis passed. Some of it did vanish, but the precedent stuck. America had gotten the taste of printing money, and, like every empire before it, found the temptation impossible to permanently resist. The slow transformation. The real shift happened in stages so gradual most people never noticed until it was way too late. 1913, the Federal Reserve gets created, handing a private institution control over America's money supply. 1933, Roosevelt confiscates private gold ownership, making it illegal for Americans to own the very metal backing their currency. 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement makes the dollar the world's reserve currency, but still keeps up the pretense of gold backing. Then came the final break. August 15, 1971, President Nixon cuts the last connection between the dollar and gold. He called it temporary, a brief pause to protect America's gold reserves. That temporary suspension is now over 50 years old. The dollar became what economists label a fiat currency, money backed by nothing except government decree and public confidence. And just like every empire before us, we convinced ourselves this time was different. The numbers don't lie. The statistics tell a story that should scare anyone paying attention. In 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, America's national debt sat around $400 billion. Today, it's blown past $30 trillion. That's not just inflation. That's what inevitably happens when you remove all limits on money creation. When governments can print unlimited currency, they always do. The temptation's too powerful, the political rewards too immediate, and the consequences too far off for most politicians to worry about. But debt is just one symptom of a much deeper sickness. The real danger appears when confidence shatters. Every fiat currency in history has eventually collapsed, not because of economic fundamentals, but because people stop believing the promises behind the paper. And that confidence, built over decades, can disappear in days. The cracks are showing. Look around the world right now and you'll see the fractures forming. China and Russia are doing business in their own currencies, completely bypassing the dollar. European nations are quietly shrinking their dollar reserves. Oil producers are accepting payment in yuan for the first time since the petrodollar system started. These aren't random coincidences. They're symptoms of fading faith in American monetary promises. The scariest part? How normal everything feels. Rome didn't collapse overnight, and neither did Spain, France, or Britain. Their currencies weakened gradually, then suddenly. Their empires crumbled slowly, then all at once.
The people living through it mostly didn't grasp what was happening until the final crash made denial impossible. The modern delusion. Americans today walk around with wallets full of paper backed by nothing except the government's promise to accept it for taxes. They store wealth in bank accounts that exist only as digital entries on computer servers. They trust a system that creates trillions of new dollars with keystrokes, watering down the value of every dollar already out there. And they do all this while believing their money is somehow different, somehow safer, somehow more permanent than every failed currency that came before. The parallels are impossible to miss. Like Spain with its silver, America prints money to fund endless wars. Like the Dutch with their speculation, America has blown financial bubbles bigger than anything in history. Like Britain abandoning gold, America has ditched every constraint that once limited monetary excess. Like the revolutionary France, America backs its currency with promises about future assets that might never exist. And like the Confederacy, America is learning that printing money doesn't create wealth. It just moves it around from savers to debtors, from the responsible to the reckless, from tomorrow to today. Where we stand now. The pattern is playing out exactly as it has 5 times before. Stage 1 completed long ago. We had real money backed by real value. Stage 2 happened gradually through the 20th century as paper promises replaced precious metal backing. Stage 3 kicked into high gear after the 2008 financial crisis as money creation hit levels that would have shocked earlier generations. We're now deep into Stage 4, watching confidence erode as more nations and institutions question whether American promises can be trusted forever. The repeating rhyme. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with a precision that should make anyone holding dollars seriously nervous. Every empire that walked this path convinced itself they were the exception. Every government that chose printing over responsibility believed their system was stronger than those that failed before. Every generation that watched their currency collapse thought they were facing something unprecedented and unique. They were all catastrophically wrong, and their confidence in their own specialness was precisely what made their downfall inevitable. The United States isn't exempt from economic laws, historical patterns, or the consequences of currency debasement. We're just the latest empire to believe we can ignore the rules that destroyed everyone before us. The final question. The question isn't whether the dollar will follow the same path as every fiat currency in history. The question is whether enough people will spot the pattern before Stage 5 kicks in, and whether anything can be done to change direction before the inevitable conclusion arrives. 500 years of history have delivered their verdict, and the message is crystal clear. The dollar's path isn't unique, unprecedented, or different from the currencies that came before it. It's tracing the exact same arc that destroyed the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound's gold backing, the French assignat, and the Confederate dollar. The technology has evolved, the scale has exploded, but the fundamental pattern remains absolutely identical. We're standing at Stage 4 of a 5-stage collapse, watching confidence drain away as the world slowly wakes up to what history has always taught. Promises aren't wealth, paper isn't value, and trust built on nothing will always return to nothing. The signs are everywhere. For anyone willing to look, the evidence is all around us. Nations dumping dollar reserves, currencies creating workarounds to American systems, debt levels that would have toppled any previous empire. The most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that we're somehow special. Every empire thought they were the exception. Every government convinced itself their system was superior. Every generation believed their currency would be the first to break the cycle. They were all devastatingly wrong. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you ignore what it's trying to teach you, it'll crush you just the same. The question isn't whether the dollar will join the cemetery of failed currencies. The question is whether you'll recognize the pattern before everyone else does. If this opened your eyes to what's heading our way, hit that subscribe button. History has already given us all the answers we need.